You're listening to Maximum Medicine Radio with host Doc Martin. Stay tuned in or call in. You won't want to miss what's happening next. How do you step into your maximum potential? How do you connect your spiritual drive with your physical path? Stick around as Doc Martin takes listeners on a journey through the seen and unseen, the accepted and the unbelievable. Get ready to meet the maximum you the world needs on Maximum Medicine Radio with Doc Martin now. Hi, everybody. I'm Doc Martin. This is Maximum Medicine. You know, the world has a lot of divide. We seem to be making everything about us or them. They're the ones that are doing that. We're the good ones. They're the bad ones. So when I was going through Instagram, I landed on Dr. Sankalp Garud's Instagram channel. Sankalp, did I pronounce you correctly?
Yeah, Sankalp Garud, yeah.
And so he is a psychologist, neuroscientist from the University of Oxford in England. And he talks often about loneliness, about building relationship. And then we'll get into a little more esoteric and see what he's got to say about consciousness. So, Dr. Garud, very welcome for you to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to talking about all of that fun topics.
Very fun. So you trained originally your university training in India, correct?
Yes, so my undergraduate was in India, yes, at a place called Ashoka University.
Uh-huh. And then what drew you to Europe and to England?
Sure. So I think the first entry point, so to speak, was doing a master's. So when I was in India, I was doing this liberal arts degree, which was like, you do a bit of everything. And then I was like, what really matters to me is studying the mind. And with that comes studying the brain. So I was like, let's find the best places I could do neuroscience at. So the place I ended up going to was University College London for my master's in neuroscience. And that's how I sort of started getting more and more into the academic study of the mind, which is neuroscience.
So what is your PhD in?
Yeah, so after my master's, I started the PhD. The PhD is in social connection, broadly speaking. So what I look at is how friendships or relationships, how they start, what happens in the brain when you're making these friendships and new connections, and how it might relate to your mental health or psychiatric profile. So just like a bit of a 360-degree understanding, I suppose, of how we connect and the role of our environments in making that happen.
So now that you just finished your PhD recently?
That's correct, yeah.
How exciting. So how does that translate into your work now?
Right. So right now I am a neuroscientist at Oxford. Postdoc is the lingo. And it's essentially just taking that work forward. So right now I'm currently, I've just started, so it's all brand new. The research is very adaptable. So, you never know what happens 2 years down the line. But for now, I think the focus is to look specifically at people with clinical depression. And see what brain circuits might be involved in this one particular symptom called anhedonia, which is lack of pleasure. And just to look at that and the brain circuits involved with that, there might be a social link as well. We'll look into that, but this is what I will be looking at going forward.
Do you do brain imaging as part of your research?
That's correct. So both my PhD and my current job will involve brain imaging through MRI. So we have like a fancy big magnet. For perspective, like the whole hospital magnets are normally somewhere around 0.5 Tesla. Tesla is how you measure the strength of a magnet. We here use, for research only, a 7 Tesla magnet, which has the capacity to lift a double-decker bus. So it's a very, very strong magnet. And the reason why we use such a small magnet is we want to go deep inside the brain. Like we want to look at all the parts that we normally can't access, at least with a high resolution, like the brain stem, which is right deep inside, and see what's happening there.
It was a big deal years ago when my local hospital got a 3 Tesla
Yeah,
MRI. And now I'm thinking
yeah.
7 Tesla. Holy moly.
Yeah, it's quite and it's very uncommon. It's not the most common research scanner either. So it's
Mhm.
only if you have a specific reason to use it, you use it. Otherwise, we also use the 3 Tesla normally.
And do you use it with using certain radioactive isotopes to light up a part of the brain?
No, so in this case, because we will look at both healthy people and people with depression, but otherwise, there's no other cause to look at just specific parts. We will be try to be as minimally invasive as possible. So it would be completely without any radioisotopes. It's just strong imaging.
So if a person is anhedonia always associated with depression?
It's a good question. I think that's pretty much an open question at this point. Um, so I think if you look at the diagnosis of depression from a DSM psychiatric perspective, anhedonia would be one of the first symptoms, if not the first symptoms that psychiatrists would look at. So in that sense, it is. But the more data we acquire, agnostic to what the clinicians diagnose with, we do see evidence of people who have depression but not as much anhedonia, and the other way around as well.
Mhm.
And if you do, if you ask, AI is the fad right these days, right? So if you ask AI to classify whether these are, they co-occur often, a lot of these quote unquote factor analysis reveal two different sort of dimensions. So there's some reason to believe now, I think, that it might be slightly separate.
Mhm. And what part of the brain do you postulate is responsible?
Sure. So for my PhD, we looked at a part of the brain called the dorsal raphe nucleus, which is where all the serotonin in the brain is created, or a large part of it. Um, for specifically anhedonia and anhedonic depression, we are looking at the dopamine parts of the brain. So there are parts in the midbrain called the substantia nigra and the ventral tegmental area. That's where all the dopamine originates and it goes to all over your brain. And so those are the parts we are looking at when it comes to anhedonia.
Mhm. I want to get into more in just a minute about
Hmm.
loneliness and friendship and well-being, but I was just struck by when you were younger and in India, you did train, you are a meditator and
Yeah.
you have that background. Tell me
Hmm.
some about that.
Yeah, in fact, all of the science part came much, much later. What I was introduced to the study of mind, as it were, was first through meditation. Like when I was in college, maybe even slightly before that, actually. I do come from a family where there is a family history of people doing long retreats. In that case, I consider myself lucky, and then I was sort of guided by my grandfather to go into one of these retreats while I was pretty young. And My first real exposure, like, to hardcore meditation was doing a 10-day retreat where you're just silent, you're focusing on your mind, studying the mind. And I really view it now, looking back in hindsight, that as like the seed of me going on this journey now to understand the mind and in all its forms and shapes.
Do you think, and you can tell us more as we go along into the topics, um, so let's just save that question, but as we go along, I'd like you to kind of interject of how meditation might help a person
Hmm.
achieve bliss, achieve connection. So let's keep that thought sort of as the topic to
Yeah,
feed in as we go. So wonderful. I love that. So you
absolutely.
also have um do you have a podcast?
Hmm.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so again, at some point in college, I was very certain that this is my path, this is my work in the world, and it felt natural to share the things I was learning. And so the podcast started now about 5 or 6 years ago. I don't even remember, but it started with the intention of clearly there's gold here, right? Like we can study the mind and we can rid ourselves of so many unhealthy patterns that we just impose on ourselves. So there's like, of course, things happening in the world which is outside our controls, but here it is, our minds, and it is completely in our controls or largely in our controls. So I was learning these many things through meditation, through more standard psychology books or therapy or those kinds of things. So I was like, I don't see anyone integrating all of that together. Like, someone who knows neuroscience as well as psychology, as well as meditation. So I was like, let's create this platform where I'm just sharing lessons that I am learning in my own journey. And sure enough, people were interested, people wanted to listen, and then it just became a thing. So it's called Understanding Emotions. And yeah, it's just basically me talking about what I'm learning in my own journey.
And you're on Instagram.
Yeah, it's I'm on Instagram. It's Sankalp VG, which is my name.
What's the V?
V is Vijay, it's my father's name.
I understand. Okay. Sunkalp VG, that's your
Yeah,
Instagram handle. Okay, wonderful.
yeah.
So let's move into friendship. You say in one of your posts, friendship is the single most important factor influencing health, well being, and happiness. Tell me what you've learned and what that means and how people can apply that.
Yeah, sure. It's actually not even my original phrasing. The particular phrase you mentioned comes from this legendary scientist who studies friendships and relationships called Robin Dunbar, who also had a chance to interview on my podcast. Um, and I think if you look at human health, we have this tendency of focusing on something that's immediately relevant for the body. Like we talk about nutrition a lot, we talk about exercise, and recently we've been talking about sleep a lot, which is absolutely fantastic. It's obviously matters, but it's not that intuitive that we think of friendships and relationships as not just important to feel good, but also as a critical pillar of our physical and mental health. And so, if you look at some research done on loneliness or social connectedness, which is like the positive side of it, you would see that there's at least a deep correlation with a person's health span. So you could think of it as in terms of mortality rates, people who have more friends, just don't die soon, I suppose. And then there is other metrics like type 2 diabetes and blood pressure. So you see, or immune health, and you just see people who have these relationship, these strong, deep personal relationship, they just tend to do better with their health. And I think that's I think the elaboration of that sentence
Mhm.
that Robin first formulated, and I sort of propagate.
Mhm. How do you think friendship or what has been studied, how does friendship influence the immune system?
Right. I think it's not exactly my place to go into the immune, uh, what happens in the immune system, because it's really not my expertise there. But um, and perhaps there's also things that are yet to be discovered. But having some friends who know more about this, what I understand is, there's parts of like inflammation and generally a connection between the gut and your brain. That is also we are discovering more and more about. And it seems to some mysterious reason, which I'm sure science will figure out with time. Um, Strong social connection seems to have a downstream effects to all functions of the body. Why that is exactly mechanistically, I honestly don't know, and it's not exactly what I could tell you more about. But seems to be the case.
Years ago, I want to say maybe in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
you weren't even alive. There was a researcher at the NIH, Dr. Candace Pert, and she wrote a book, The Molecules of Emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And that was sort of a takeoff from there. A lot of studies were done showing that your emotions really did change your brain.
Mm-hmm.
So, friendship, how have you? proposed or are you going to study that friendship actually changes your brain?
Right. I think there's there's two things to it, right? First of all, what have I done, and then there's like what is the literature, and there's this larger study of the brain with respect to social connection. Um, I think one solid piece of literature that I know of is um, this idea of social exclusion. So, when kids play in the playground, oftentimes kids have this social dynamic going on where some kids are left off. And it may or may not be malicious and intense on parts of other kids, but that is a phenomenon that happens, right? You get left off and then you feel bad about it. And then there's some researchers who have seen this sort of a game and what happens in the brain when you get excluded socially. And they showed parts of the brain that also code for pain light up, so physical pain. And of course, you could flip that around. When you are connected, parts of the brain are not as active, that are sensitive to pain. So there seems to be like not just this imagined pain or mental pain, but like maybe it may even be like a visceral, literal pain that people are experiencing when we are in social connected worlds or not. So I think there's that, and then there is what I study, which is more on the serotonin. Now I do, I mean, we have to be careful here because just because you see something in the brain doesn't mean it's good or bad. There's much more to sort of decipher there, but you do see systems of serotonin responsive to friendships and social connections. So that was my default around. So yeah, I mean, I think there's more and more we are studying about the brain, and we are discovering that, hey, look, these hormones, chemicals, neurotransmitters that we think are good do seem to be more active and when you are more socially connected or feel belonged.
Well, it's interesting because in primary care, it's in general medicine, it's very common to have a chronic pain person with a low mood.
Hmm.
And when I'm always explaining it to my patients as this medicine is marketed as an antidepressant, but it actually helps pain. And I said, it seems like if you're depressed, the pain is more real, then the pain is worse, then your mood is worse because the pain is a vicious cycle. But I think we're going to find out that there is actually a biochemical linkage. So maybe I'm hoping you'll figure that out. But I do see that over and over. And when, especially, often it's mostly women have this unexplained gut discomfort.
Hmm.
Nothing is perfect about their food. Nothing feels right.
Hmm.
Everything is kind of, they've got an ache here, a pain there. No amount of testing can show what it is. And I'll
Hmm.
say, let's try an antidepressant.
Hmm.
And just for you and your science mind, it's usually a tricyclic. Um,
Hmm.
and it improves functional
Hmm.
abdominal pain. We say functional when we have no idea what's causing it because we've
Right.
tested for everything, but it
Right.
works. It's
Yeah.
just and I'm waiting for the fully understood integration of the gut neurons, and then even one step further, the gut microbiome and its
Hmm.
relationship to the gut neurons, which is related then to pain and
Right.
to anyway. So we're diving down into this. I'm eager to learn. I'm waiting for. To me, there's really juicy stuff in there that hopefully
Yeah.
you guys will uncover in the next 10 years. So.
Yeah. 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 Thanks for sharing that. I think you're absolutely spot on there. Like, I think that uh, that connection, let's say, between the gut and the brain and then the body, I think there's a lot to discover there. And for listeners, I'm sure but the listeners may not know that the gut has the second highest concentration of neurons in your body, apart from your brain and the central nervous system, so to speak. So it's there's a lot of there's a lot more going there than just digestion.
And if you, I'll just throw this out for people to think about. Before animals evolved to have great intelligence and great brains, they had a gut. Worms have a gut. And,
Yeah.
you have to eat to survive. You might not have to think very intelligent thoughts to survive, but you do have to eat. So I think there's going to be, if, when we dive into that, there's going to be a lot uncovered. And there's ways also as a physician that's interested in alternative approaches, there are ways of steering a person's nutrition to improve their microbiome, and they actually end up feeling better emotionally.
Yeah.
It's wild. I like it. But so
Yeah.
let's move on to another topic that's exciting. And I want to hear what you have to say about emotional intelligence, because when I have my radio show, it's mostly about the mystical in healing, and it's mostly about consciousness and intention, and the fact that we don't really value, we're starting to, we don't value intuition. And yet there is an intelligence that exists in the emotional realm. Can you talk some about that?
Sure. So I think this might be a good time to revisit that bookmark of meditation that we put earlier.
Okay.
And so, really, the most important insight I got from meditation was to realize that the mind is all we have. Like, we are seeing and experiencing reality, but it is always done through this filter of the mind. It's like having a pair of sunglasses always on. And we have then further that ability to detect whether that sunglass is biased in some way. So is it like if I'm wearing a red sunglass, then I'm going to see red all over. And that could be thought of, let's say, as a metaphor for anger. Like, if
Mhm.
I have anger in my mind, even a trivial incident outside, I might interpret it through this lens of resentment or anger, or like, the world is against me, or things like that. So really, whenever we are studying neuroscience, it's all fantastic, but really the simplest insight there is we all have a mind, and that is primal. That is first thing. And the emotions that happen in the mind, therefore, um, are somewhat in our control, and our happiness, therefore, is therefore in our control. So emotional intelligence, as the way I see it, is simply the skill set that is needed to go towards happier and healthier states of mind. And the lack of emotional intelligence would be to go through more towards the negative states of mind. So that's how I fundamentally see it. It's everything happens in the mind, and therefore it's wise to be intelligent about emotions, because we have a lot of leverage there to improve our quality of lives without much changing in the external world, really, sometimes.
One of the things that is talked about often in mystical discussions and discussions of meditation is the brain is not the seat of the self.
Hmm.
Explain that.
Yeah. Um, so this is like right deep inside the meditation territory, right? And um, so the key insight. So the promise of meditation is, we can get rid of suffering. It's a very bold project in that way. And the key insight that brings about that change is this understanding that the self is an illusion. The sense of self we feel, it's an illusion. Um, and it's only a small extension from that there is nothing in the brain either. But really, the claim is even bigger than the claim is not just that there's no self in the brain, the claim is that there's no self at all. Anyway, and that can be quite trippy, and I totally get that, and can elaborate on that. But if you think about all of the suffering we cause to ourselves, it's generally self-centered. Like it's like I am not worthy, or I'm unattractive, or I did not get this, I did not get that. And breaking through that illusion of the self, therefore, has the potential to just uproot suffering from its roots. Right? There's no self, so no suffering there. Um, in terms of the brain, because you asked of the brain specifically, I think there was hypothesis around, there is some parts of the brain that seats the self or seats the soul. And I think that's at this point it's largely debunked, right? We've seen all of the brain. There's no particular parts of the brain that are active necessarily when you think about yourself, or something that generates the self. All parts of the brain seem to be equally involved, and neuroscience largely has proceeded towards thinking of ourselves and our brain processes or mental processes as networks and connections, rather than this part is exclusively dedicated to making you or something like that. So I think even from a neuroscience perspective, if you look in, there is no particular area that you can call, this is you.
One of the things that I find very interesting about meditation, and it brings us back to the concept of connectedness and today's factions and division and loneliness. And when you are aware of that universal space of which you're a part, but only a tiny part, that everyone is a part of, the place that you connect to in meditation, there is, to me, a powerful potential for recognizing that we are not separate. And so for me, I ask all my guests who are meditators to remind people that when you do this and you feel that transcendent space, and if we use New Age terms, you get a lot of heart opening, then that can translate into your day-to-day world, where you are then recognizing your connection to the person on the bus, one of your coworkers, someone in the grocery store. And that could be a very powerful way to overcome our factions.
Yeah.
Because we have, I don't know of how it is in England these days, but the United States is seriously split.
Yeah.
Seriously split. And it's painful for me. It's very painful for me to see people against each other. So tell me your thoughts in that idea of consciousness and connection.
Right. Yeah. 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 First of all, I want to acknowledge I don't live in the US, but I do have plenty of friends from the US and in the US. And there's definitely general or general trend toward unhappiness and more polarization, which is not very pleasant to witness even. And of course, the ripple waves are felt here in England as well. So I do want to acknowledge that sentiment, that it's just the polarization might just be growing and growing, and it's very painful to see. In terms of consciousness and recognizing the illusion of the self, a lot of times it might come across as a very, clinical insight, like, sure, the self doesn't exist, now what? But it's not just a matter of this theoretical understanding. Like, it's more about the consequences of what that insight brings about. And one of those consequences is this idea of feeling connected with others. The reason why that happens is because when you have a self, then you automatically have an other. But the moment you question that assumption of the self, the other disappears, and then you're more interconnected.
The boundaries, your identity boundaries dissolve.
Exactly, exactly. And there's plenty of words for this in the New Age / meditation world. Like, you can call it non-duality, you could call it interconnectedness, you could call it emptiness, but they're all roughly pointing to this idea of you're breaking the sense of self, and then you feel therefore this flow of energy, which is not anymore restricted by this framework of you that you thought it you were. um, and because I also come from this rational scientific world, another way to explain that is also when you go on this meditation project, what you're doing is learning more and more about your mind. And one thing that happens when you learn more about yourself is you're also automatically learning more about others, because others have a mind as well. And in general, people have minds and the world has minds. So the more you understand your own mind, therefore solidifies your understanding of others' minds. And precisely, it also solidifies the understanding of others' suffering. And the moment you get that understanding that, look, me struggling here in my meditation cushions, struggling to sit, is directly related to every other suffering I've had and related to every other suffering others have had, then that just opens the floodgates to more and more connection. Because that person, Sally over there, who I despise, and she makes so much noises in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
she also is similar to me. She has also a mind similar to mine and suffers similar to me. And I think that is the power of recognizing this um, illusion of the self, and the power of just generally studying the minds and understanding the minds.
So, in our last few minutes, with your studies, both your mystical experience and your rational scientific studies, what wisdom can you share with the listeners about the value of friendship, how to overcome loneliness, and what else would you share with people?
Sure. I think the first thing I would share is one thing that I already shared, which is the mind is all you have. And therefore, what it does is it places a lot of control in you. When we are thinking about the world causing problems to us, it's very hard to control the world. But the moment we get that, we have a little bit of leverage there with our minds, because then that's the filter, that is like immensely powerful, because now I have control, now I have things to do. And therefore, investing in the mind, investing in emotional intelligence, learning more, listening to your podcast or reading books or whatever form that might take, coaching, therapy, whatever, that is a thing to do for general overall well-being. One of the things that I have sort of uh, propagated or promoted is this idea of social connection being one of those ingredients, which we often miss. And so, from a more practical perspective, I think social connection and building more friendships, I think a lot of that boils down to courage and social courage. Um, Rejection is a big deal. It seems trivial, right? Whatever, you get rejected, but it actually, again, I shared about this research that it might activate pain circuits in your brain, and we all know the experience of really wanting some position or some role and then getting rejected, or getting rejected by someone we liked or whatever. And so developing social courage is also a very underrated thing that's done. And you could develop social courage by going out and starting more conversations. Like, there are people in this world. And oftentimes we might end up living in this silo of going to my work, doing my work, coming back home, sleeping, repeat the cycle. And sometimes just, going on a walk on Sunday afternoon and just smiling at people, even that is one of the most powerful emotional boosts you could have, let alone talking to them or connecting with them on a deeper level.
And how do you see that both from a brain function and improving your mood? How do you personally see that as a benefit for the world?
Right. I think from a personal point of view, I did not grow up very socially confident. I was like shy and reserved, and might even qualify as socially anxious, although I never did a test, so to speak. But definitely that was not a pleasant ride socially. And the moment I started working with excellent psychologists who taught me the ropes of confidence and social confidence, and not just working like therapy or in my mind, but actually asking me to go out in the world and actually talk to people, and talk to
Was that
strangers. And
hard? Was that
it
hard
was
at first?
definitely, and it still is. It's never simple, especially if you're not in touch. Like, if you've lost the momentum and it's been a long while. Um, of course, it's easier with practice, but it's still a quite times.
How did you talk to yourself when you're standing there and that anxiety is flooding you and all you want to do is turn and run away?
Yeah.
What did you say to yourself to help you keep being brave?
Yeah, I think the strongest thing I said to myself was uh, the world or the people are on my side. Like, I think the key switch that gets flipped for the worse in social anxiety situations is thinking that somehow the other person is a threat. Like, we feel that's somehow a threat to be avoided. But the moment you realize that they're just other people who in fact could be on your side, that changes everything. Like, if you look at standard projections of what happens when you go and talk to people, when you're just projecting it in your mind, it's like, they will think, why are they wasting my time? Who is he? What does he want from me? Does he want to sell me something, etc., etc. And sure enough, sometimes you get reactions which are
Scammed.
congruent with that. Exactly.
Mhm.
But surprisingly, quite often people say hi back. What a surprise, right? But except it's not, it's normal to say hi. And then your brain realizes that, oh, what I was thinking is not what reality is. And it starts to adapt. And the more then you get more and more experiences of people being nice and friendly. And then you realize, oh, it's not a threat after all. These are just people like me.
Mhm.
So the world is a friendly place, is another way to say it.
Yeah, I like that. I like that you've got research going that's really going to help understand our connections.
Mhm.
And thank you for doing that for the world. Do you have any one last thing to say to our listeners? Any?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think the key message I try to hammer again and again is oftentimes, especially in the world that we are living in today, with the wars going on in the world and economic turbulence, to say the least, it's very easy to think that we are helpless, like we don't have anything in our control. Um, and it's not completely untrue. Like, ultimately, the brain has evolved to detect these things that are beyond our control. But at the same time, it is emotional intelligence that you can count on to keep you stable and healthy and even happy, dare I say, in the most turbulent times. And I think that bit, it's the oldest insight in the book, know thyself, or my
Mhm.
version of that would be grow your emotional intelligence. But
Mhm.
it's the oldest insight in the book that there are things in your control right now, in the present moment. And I just like to point out that source of power that we all have within us.
I love that. That's why my show is titled Maximum Medicine, because we have so much power and
Yeah,
we don't always recognize it.
love it, love it.
Everybody, Dr. Sankalp Garud, he's here, neuroscientist, psychologist, meditator, mystic in his own way, teaching us about overcoming loneliness, the power of friendship for our happiness, and to make the world a better place. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Maximum Medicine Radio with Doc Martin. Tune in next time while the doc talks health, spirituality, and the impact your beliefs have on every part of who you are, body and soul. Doc Martin unpacks the challenges we face as human beings and teaches callers to open the door between the scientific and the mystical. To learn more about Doc Martin and Maximum Medicine, visit www.sharonmartinmd.com.